Today's episode of Just the Tip Tuesday is brought to you by FCAW Worldwide, the standard in TIG welding. If you need torches, parts, consumables, or accessories for your TIG welding applications, whether at home or at work, go check out FCAW Worldwide. FCAW has revolutionized the TIG welding game with several different types of TIG welding torches, cups, collets, collet bodies, gas lenses, and gas cups. I'm currently using their FlexLock 230 water-cooled torch with a gas lens and super cups, which are made of silicon nitride. The super cups withstand high heat applications, high amperage, and high heat reflective applications, and they last longer than the standard aluminum nozzles we're also familiar with, and they resist cracking due to thermal shock. Head on over to ckworldwide.com today and check out their full selection of parts, torches, consumables, and accessories. You can only get genuine FCAW Worldwide products through an authorized distributor, so make sure to check out the Find a Dealer tab on their website to find the closest supplier near you. FCAW Worldwide, the standard in TIG welding. Now let's get into the show. What's going on, everybody? Happy Tuesday. Today's question for Just the Tip was submitted by Bo Phillips via the ARC Junkies website, arcjunkies.com. Bo says, "Hey Jason, love the show. Just an idea for Just the Tip. Could you go over welding processes and the polarities used in each process? I get this question a lot and hope you could give some ideas on how to maybe answer this question a little easier." Bo, thanks for the question. Also, please send me an email with your address so I can get out your sticker pack for you. You did not have an email listed in your message. So shoot me an email, show@arcjunkies.com, and I'll be more than happy to get that sticker pack out for you. This is an awesome topic. I remember as a young welder, polarities always messed me up, and I can never remember which damn polarity to use for which process. And honestly, most of the guys that I work with, they weren't always 100% sure either. Nor could they really explain why, which is something I always wanted to know. Why? Why do we need to do it this way? Why does this work? Why doesn't this work? I was never trying to be a smartass. I just wanted to know why we did things a certain way so I could get a deeper understanding of it. And polarity was always one of the questions that nobody could ever really answer for me. And it wasn't until I got into teaching and I started doing some research on my own that I found out what this polarity business was all about and why it was so important to each welding process. Well, let's go ahead and dig into Bo's question a little bit. There's a lot of different welding processes out there. There's about 120 different welding processes or so last time I heard. But we're all familiar with the most common, which are shielded metal arc welding, gas metal arc welding, flux core arc welding, both self-shielded and gas shielded, and gas tungsten arc welding. When it comes to polarity, we really only have two choices, DC positive or DC negative. Well, let's just say three because we also have AC, alternating current, but that's not really considered a polarity. It's just bouncing back and forth between positive and negative about 60 times a second here in the States, and about 50 times a second elsewhere throughout the globe. But before we get into it, it's probably a good idea to discuss the several different names DC positive and DC negative are referred to as. DC positive is often referred to as DC plus, DC electrode positive, or DCEP, and it can also be called DC reverse polarity or DCRP. All of these terms are correct and they're used interchangeably depending on who you're talking to, which document or manual you're reading, or which machine you're operating. Likewise, we also have some additional terms for DC negative. It can also be referred to as DC minus, DC electrode negative, or DCEN, and it can also be called DC straight polarity or DCSP. Once again, these terms are correct and they're used interchangeably depending on who you're talking to, which document or manual you're reading, and which machine you're operating. And then we also have AC, which is probably the easiest to remember, alternating current, and the majority of the time, people just call it AC. Confusing stuff, right? Especially if you're new to welding or you've never had formal training. But what exactly does polarity do, and why is it such an important variable? Well, in a welding circuit, current always flows from the negative terminal to the positive terminal. Always. And we can change the polarity we're running based on which lead we hook up to the positive and the negative terminals. Because of this, we get about 70% of our heat from the positive terminal and about 30% of that heat from the negative, regardless of the polarity we select. So, for example, with DC electrode positive, or reverse polarity, meaning our electrode is hooked up to the positive terminal and the workpiece clamp is hooked up to the negative, we get about 70% of our heat on the electrode. The other 30% of that heat is going to be on the workpiece clamp. And on DC negative, or straight polarity, our electrode is hooked up to the negative terminal and our workpiece clamp is hooked up to the positive. We'll have 30% of our heat on the electrode and 70% of the heat on the workpiece clamp, or the work part, whatever we're hooking that workpiece clamp up to. DC electrode positive is going to yield a deeper yet somewhat narrower penetration profile, whereas DC electrode negative is going to give us a shallower and wider penetration profile. This principle has given me a good understanding of how polarity actually works, and now helps me make sure that I have the proper setup based off the welding process I'm going to run. The polarity that we decide to use is extremely important based on the welding process we want to use and the type of electrode we want to use. Let's go ahead and break down which polarity we should use for each welding process. We'll start off with my favorite welding process, shielded metal arc welding, also called stick welding. With FCAW, we're primarily going to run DC positive. So we're going to hook the electrode holder or stinger up to the positive terminal and the workpiece clamp up to the negative. This is going to apply to most stick welding electrodes with a few exceptions. Electrodes ending with number 2 or 4, we're going to go ahead and run them on DC negative or straight polarity. I used to run a lot of 60-22 when I did ironwork, and that's how we welded up all the decking to the bar joist, the perimeter angle, and the I-beams. It's a fast freeze rod that allows me to secure thin gauge sheet metal to thicker items. It gives me shallow penetration, but a wide bead profile, which helps secure that decking in place. The other electrode is a 70-24 or a jet rod, which is used for fast fill applications. This is another common stick electrode that we're going to run on DC negative. 70-24 fills fast, but also has a shallow weld penetration when compared to other electrodes ran on DC positive. So if we remember DC electrode negative, we get shallow penetration and a wider weld. Both 60-22 and 70-24 are shallow penetrating electrodes that have wider bead profiles. I did a whole episode on just the tip a while back called What the F Number, which goes further into detail on the different electrodes, their polarities, flux compositions, all that good stuff. So if you want more information on the different types of rods and their uses, be sure to check out that episode. I'll go ahead and link that in the show notes. The next one is gas metal arc welding or MIG welding. We're always going to use DC positive for this polarity. You should never have to switch polarity on solid wire MIG welds. So remember that solid wires will always be ran on DC positive. This is going to hold true for steel wires, stainless steel wires, and aluminum wires. Although you can run aluminum MIG on AC with some advanced machines, but that's a topic for a completely separate episode. Just remember, if you're going to run gas metal arc welding, go ahead and just set it up with DC positive. Now when it comes to flux cord, this can be a little bit tricky. Most, but not all self-shielded wires are going to run on DC negative. Some of them are going to run on DC positive. So in this instance, if I were using an electrode that I wasn't familiar with and I didn't have a WPS to go off of, I'd be damn sure to check the spec sheet that comes with the wire or on the side of the box or a consumables manual, or hell, I'd just do a quick Google search and find the PDF for the spec on this specific wire to determine which polarity I should be running on. I've actually seen a lot of guys out in the field swear up and down that flux core is just junk wire and it's good for nothing and they can't get it to look right and it's just nasty stuff. Nobody wants to mess with it. And then I look over their machines and it's a specific wire, for DC negative, and they've got their terminal or they've got their suitcase welder or their wire feeder hooked up to the positive terminal. That's a great teaching moment. Once we switch it back over to DC negative and get them all set up, dialed in, they start loving the wire. So a lot of the times it could just be polarity is the issue. So if you're running a lot of flux core and it's coming out like crap, go ahead and switch to polarity. That's usually rule number 1. You actually should be able to hear the difference between DC positive and DC negative wire. It's going to sound like crap if you get it hooked up backwards. So step 1, switch polarity. 9 times out of 10, that's going to solve your problem. But when it comes to gas shielded flux core, all of these wires are going to run on DC positive. So remember, if you've got gas shielded flux core, it's a deep penetrating wire. So we're going to need that DC positive polarity to help pack that punch. So make sure that if you're using gas shield wire, hook your wire feed assembly to your positive terminal. If you want some more information on the ins and outs of flux core, you can go ahead and check out the Just the Tip Tuesday episode I did called Flux Core Arc Welding, Gas Shielded versus Self-Shielded, where I go a bit more in depth on each of the processes. I'll go ahead and drop a link to that in the show notes as well. And last but not least, this one really helps to drive the point home and make it all make sense. Gas tungsten arc welding, also known as TIG welding. This process is going to run on DC negative for all of your steel and stainlesses. and on AC for all of your aluminum and magnesium welding. Here's the fun part. Pure tungsten melts at around 6,280 degrees Fahrenheit. Try to remember that. Now, remember earlier when I said DC negative, we have about 30% of our heat on negative? Well, that works out to about 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit on the tungsten. If we switch over to DC positive and try to TIG weld, it's going to melt the tungsten. And that's because we have about 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit applied to the tungsten, which exceeds its melting point. So if we hook it up to DC positive, the tungsten's going to melt. In fact, if you're using an old school transformer rectifier machine and you want to weld aluminum, the first thing we always did was ball the tungsten. And we do that by switching the machine over to DC positive and lighting up our tungsten at really low amps on a copper block to get that tungsten to melt just enough to form a little ball on the end. Then we'd switch back over to AC and start welding the aluminum. Additionally, if we wanted to use DC positive to TIG weld, you'd actually need a tungsten roughly 4 times the diameter of what we'd use on DC negative to handle the same amount of amperage. For example, if I have a 3/32 diameter tungsten, I can run anywhere from about 120 to 250 amps. That's what the chart says. I know we can run much lower than that, but we're gonna max out somewhere around 250 amps. But if I switch that over to DC positive with that same 3/32 diameter electrode, I could only run about 30 amps before the tungsten starts to melt. Crazy, right? And for aluminum, we're going to go ahead and run alternating current because I want the best of both worlds. I need the cleaning action from the DC positive side of the cycle, but I also need some of that penetration from the DC negative side. As before, I did a separate episode on Just the Tip Tuesday entitled What is Amplitude, where I talk a little bit more in depth on alternating current and balance for aluminum TIG welding. So if you missed that, go ahead and check it out. Once again, I'll leave that in the show notes. One thing my instructor did teach me when I was going through welding school, the easiest way to remember this is DC negative, straight polarity, sharp tungsten, stainless steel, and steel. They all start with S. Alternating current and aluminum, they both start with A. So that's just one little trick of remembering which polarity you should be using when it comes to gas tungsten arc welding. Well, I hope this clears things up. Like I said, I struggled with this stuff at the beginning of my career on which polarity to use for a given process, but once I understood what polarity is, what it does, and how it works, it really helped me to understand which polarity I should use for each different welding process. Once again, if you're in doubt, go ahead and check the specs on the PDF. You can literally type in e7018.pdf. Boom, you'll get a PDF on how to run that rod. Same thing with flux core. You type in E71T1, it's going to give you the rundown. 71A85, same thing. Hobart 777, boom, same information. So regardless of which electrode you're going to use, if you're not sure which polarity you should be running, go ahead and pull the spec sheet. A lot of times this can be listed on your welding procedure specification, but if you don't have that at your disposal, go ahead and check the specs. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this episode of Just the Tip Tuesday. As always, if you have a topic you want discussed, you could shoot me an email, show@arcjunkies.com. You can drop me a DM on Instagram @Junkies Podcast, or shoot me a message through the website, arcjunkies.com. If I pick your question, I'll give you a shout out on the show and send you an Arc Junkies sticker pack. Also, don't forget to tune in tomorrow for a new episode of Weld Wednesday with AWS, where I chat with Steve Snyder, who's one of the people that I look up to along my welding journey. I hope you all have a kick-ass week. Stay safe out there, and until next time, make every weld better than your last.